How are you guys? Is it 7? Did we hit it already?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Somewhere.
Somewhere the sun is over the yard arm. So anyway, good to be here. Wonderful to be here. Thank you, Ann, for this lovely opportunity. Great, like that, because this is the last shot in the arm we get before we go back to Wyoming. About 4 days ago, it already snowed 4 inches. So we have that to look forward to. Like that, so. But yeah, and somebody was asking me, and who was asking me about the 26, like how we went from 25 to 26, like that. Dave did. Dave?
Oh, yeah.
Dan asked me about it, like that, and it was funny like that because they came in the darkness of night and they switched our signs like that from 25 to 26 like that, and everybody was running around trying to figure out what was going on like that because there was nobody moved in, nobody had a baby, nothing happened, and so I've got a sneaking suspicion of what happened is that it's the state trying to scam more money out of the federal government is what they're trying to do. Like if there's enough towns that have an increase in population, they could get more federal money, like, and so they decided after 40 years, UCross should be able to have at least one more. So, and it's funny, like that, because if you go into town from like Sheridan, it says 26. Like, and if you go in from Buffalo, it says 26. If you come in from over in Gillette, around through Claremont, it still says 25. Okay, so I don't know if they ran out of money, like that, and couldn't change the one sign that's left, or else somebody just forgot, like that. So anyway, I still think we're 25. Like that. But anyway, it's wonderful to be here. Like that. This is always a fun stop for us, like that, because California, we like California, and we get a chance to see all of our friends, like in Los Angeles too, when we come into town. But this is the 18th book in the Walt Longmire series, which sounds really strange coming out of my mouth. I don't know if I've told you guys this story before, like that, but whenever I wrote the first book, The Cold Dish, I wrote it as a standalone book. It was just a novel, is all it was. Like it, and, it took me long enough to write it. Like I didn't think I'd ever write another one like that. And so then the president of Penguin USA at that point in time was this little British woman called Catherine Court. She's about Ann's size, as a matter of fact. And I used to refer to her as the 600-pound gorilla in the room because she was the boss. Like that. And so it was funny like that because whenever they said they were going to publish The Cold Dish, she sat me down like that. And she said, "We really like these characters. We really like this place. We really think you should consider possibly writing some more of these. We think this is a series." Is what it is. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had like one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA and going, "Yeah, no, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that's a good idea. But I got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you and everything." And she said, "Well, why don't you go back to your ranch in Wyoming and think about this?" And so I did. And when I did, it was funny because Judy, my wife, who's right up here, about halfway, wave your hand, honey. Tell her how nice her hair looks.
Your hair looks great.
Doesn't her hair look great? Anyway, I'll pay for that later. Anyway, she said, "Don't you remember what you were like when you finished The Cold Dish?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You were like depressed. You were like walking around the ranch, in a full-blown depression like that." And I started remembering like that. It was kind of like a mass death. It was like all these characters had died, and they had become really good friends of mine over a period of time when I was writing that novel. Like, and I thought, well, and so she said, I thought, well, if anybody's going to write another one, you're going to have to do it, you idiot, like it. And so I decided, okay, well, I'll do it, like it. And so what I did was I decided that I told them I would do 4. I would do 4 books in the series, like it. And basically, it was a Vivaldi, is what it was. Like, and I said, I'll do the 4 seasons, is what I'll do. Believe it or not, as cold and as much snow as there is in The Cold Dish, that's fall. And then, Death Without Company, like it is winter. Kindness Goes Unpunished is spring, like in Another Man's Moccasins, finished up that one literary year of Walt's life, like with 4 books. And by the time I got finished with these 4 books, I was having so much fun that I decided, okay, I got to keep writing these because I was having too good of a time. But it was interesting too, like that, because a couple of things happened. First of all, by writing the books in different in different periods of time, like in different seasons, it gave me very, very different environments, for each book. Because like July ain't nothing like January in Wyoming, and so And then the other thing that it did was, which was by accident, which was really actually something that worked out really, really well. It takes me 4 books to get through 1 year of Walt's life. And so here in 2 years, when I finish up like the 20th book, which I've already going to get started on, probably when I get back to the ranch, Walt will only be 5 years older than when we first met him. I, on the other hand, will be 20 years older than when we first met me. Like, so at some point in time, it's like I'm going to be older than Walt. Like, and I don't know if I like that idea at all. And then the other problem that I created for myself is whenever people always ask, they say, how'd you get the idea to do these books? And you gotta remember, like about 20 years ago, everything was noir. Everything was all like dark and gritty, alleys and, alcoholic divorce detectives, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just not the kind of guys that I saw in law enforcement. And I thought to myself, living in New Cross, Wyoming, I thought, well, what if you did, a book where the guy was the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America? Wouldn't that be something completely different, than everything that's coming out now? And so it worked. Like the thing I did not take into consideration though was how many people can you kill in the least populated county in Wyoming before it really starts getting kind of absurd, And so what I started doing then was I started doing Walt like a ball team, I started doing it like the Angels. I do home and away, Because the other thing is like, whenever you see these books, like it seems funny to me like that because the characters always break these incredibly big cases. They're always like doing these amazing things. And then by the time you get to the next book, everybody forgot, that they did all this stuff. And this is not the way things work. I mean, if you got somebody who's really good on these cold cases, really good investigator, something like that, believe me, the other 23 sheriffs in Wyoming would go and knock on Walt's door and say, hey, we need some help with this one case. How about helping us out? And so then I started branching out a little bit of Montana and South Dakota and a lot of other. I mean, the 3rd book takes place in Philadelphia, for goodness sake. That 4th book, however, takes place in Vietnam in 1968. So then I started figuring out I could do different time periods too, which was kind of fun to do. This one though is a little bit different from any of the others I've ever written. It definitely stretches the envelope, and I'm really kind of proud of the fact that I can do that for 2 different reasons. The first one being I am with a literary press. I'm with this wonderful literary press, Viking Penguin, that doesn't have hardly any mystery authors at all. I mean, I think there's me and I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 others, but that's it. And I'll give you an indication of what that's like. Do you guys know what my contracts with Viking Penguin say? No. They say, it must be a mystery and have Walt Longmire in it. That's a lot of leeway. To get into trouble, I go in a lot of different directions. And they don't require any kind of synopsis of what it is that I'm working on or what the book is going to be like or anything. They just turn me loose and let me do whatever it is I want to do. And the other one's responsible for this freedom that I have and being able to push the envelope and try not to become formulaic and not start repeating myself or doing I mean, we've all started these series like that where the books go gangbusters at first, and then you get about 7 or 8 books in, and they start just seeming an awful lot alike. And so I've always guarded against that. The next statement that I always make is I don't ever write a book where Walt is on a cruise ship. I don't ever want to write a book where Walt is chasing Al-Qaeda in Crook County or something like that, right? And so anyway, the other group that makes all of that possible is you. I like to think that my readership is a little smarter than the average bear. I mean, there are a lot of people, and God bless them, they get their books, out of the checkout line at the grocery store, or, they buy them at the airport or whatever, and they're happy with that formula. They like, not being surprised. They like not being, challenged by the book or anything like that. They just like a nice little story that comes out and finishes and has an end, and all of that. But that would drive me nuts, I have to admit. If I had to write that kind of book, I would have quit, after 1 or 2, and that would have been the end of it. And this one definitely, it stretches the imagination quite a bit on this one. To talk about this book, though, I kind of have to go back just a little bit, and talk about last year's book, Daughter of the Morning Star, because there's a continuation aspect to it that goes on into Hell and Back. And when it starts off I actually, there's always a moment, there's always something that I see or a moment I can kind of harken back to and think about when the idea for a book started. And I remember that Marcus Red Thunder, you don't know Marcus, but you do know Marcus. Marcus is the model for Henry in the books. And so we were standing there in Hardin on the Crow Reservation, getting ready to go in and do a library event, because I always invite him to go with me whenever up in, in Crow or in the Northern Cheyenne land. And so, we're standing there getting ready to go on, like, and I was standing there looking around the entryway of the library, and there was a bulletin board, to one side, and there was a missing persons poster, like a homemade one off of a computer, and I noticed like that because the sunshine had come through the entryway of the library and would go all the way around, the library entryway, all the way halfway across that bulletin board and halfway across that young woman's face before the sun went down. And a year later, the only part of her face that was left was only one half. One half of it was gone. One half of the reward information was gone. One half the contact information was gone. And it was just gut-wrenching to see that. Because I thought to myself, what could be worse than losing somebody you love? Having them just simply disappear. You don't know what happened to them. You don't know where they went. You don't know anything. Like, I can't think of a more psychologically gaping wound to have to carry, for the rest of your life. And so it got me interested, in the subject matter. And you got to remember, this is like about 5 or 6 years ago, whenever this first started happening, and I started working on this idea. And I started looking up the statistics for murdered and missing Indigenous women in Indian country, and it was staggering. I contacted the Department of Justice, like I got the report back from them, and I wrote Viking Penguin. I said, this is kind of what I'm thinking about working on. And they said, you better check your statistics. There's no way that could be right. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And so I thought, okay, that's what this book is going to be about. Well, it's all fine and well to have a social issue, to have something to write about, but you got to have a story to go along with it too, right? And so I was trying to figure what kind of a story I wanted to hang this social problem on, because I kind of tend to write what I refer to as socially responsible crime fiction, in the sense that, I'm trying to say something. I'm not just trying to chuck, bodies into cordwood like that, just to keep you turning pages or something. And so I got another call from a good buddy of mine, by the name of Tiger Scalpcane, who is the athletic director for the Lame Deer High School up in Lodgegrass on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And he called me up and he goes, hey, my daughter is the starting center for the Morning Stars this Friday. You got to come up, you got to watch the game. So we jumped in the truck, drove up, got there. And the game that we actually saw was Lodgegrass versus Lame Deer. Now, for those of you who are nodding and shaking your heads, you know what this means. What that means is Northern Cheyenne versus Crow. Okay? So those of you who think the Indian Wars are over, they are not. They're being played out, out there on those basketball courts. I have never seen so many hip checks, headbutts, sprained fingers, bloodied noses, and this was the girls' basketball team, right? And they were just ferocious, they were just playing with so much pride, and just so desperate, to win these games, and just in their faces you could just see it was almost like light, shining out of their faces, and Judy and I walked out of the high school that night, and I turned to her and I was like, well, that's what this book is about. And so, Daughter of the Morning Star is about a young ball player by the name of Jaya Long. And Jaya Long is an extraordinary basketball player. She's really, 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 really good. The problem being she starts receiving these death threats. And they have to be taken seriously because she has a sister, Jeannie, who disappeared a year ago. And so, Lolo Long, the tribal police chief, calls up Walt and says, hey, can you come up and do a little bit of an investigation, maybe a little bit of bodyguard duty for this situation And I've put Walt in some really dangerous situations before, but putting him in a bus load of teenage girls is probably the most dangerous situation I've ever put him in ever. So of course he calls Henry and says, I need your help. So the two of them kind of provide bodyguard duty for Jaya Long. And during the course of the book, everything the book has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we find out what happened to Jeannie and all these things like that. But there's also something else going on. There's also something else going on in the book. There's a spirituality or a mysticism that is such a major part of the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow. And I introduce, the beginnings of a story that I'll tell you how I came to know the Evoitse Heo Mese. And how it happened was, I was sitting on the front porch of Charles Whiteman, who you do not know, but you do know, because he is Lonnie Littlebird in the books. Yes, it is so. And so I was sitting on his porch, late in the fall, maybe autumn, and we're sitting there, and it's getting dark, and his grandkids are out playing past the corral up near the tree line. Like it's getting dark, and they're kind of going in this canyon and come back out of the canyon and everything like that. And he's yelling at him. He yells over at him like that, and he tells him, and I got a working knowledge of Cheyenne like that, but he's yelling at him, and he tells him like that to get back over here to the house like that. And then he says this phrase that I'd never heard before, "Evo et se heo mese," and I thought, wonder what that means. Like, so the kids, when they heard that, they come running back. I mean, they just come skedaddling back out of the the woods over there. Like, they get back over near the house. I turned to Charles and I said, Charles, what was that term that you used, the Evo et se heo mese? And he goes, oh, it's just a boogeyman. He says, it's just a boogeyman that we use, to kids, whenever they get out too far or something like that. We want to run them back, and we tell them that Evo et se heo mese is going to get them like it. And so it usually gets them back in here like that. And I was like, okay, all right. And so we finished up like that, and I left like that. And I was back down at the house, and I dug out my Charles, Bird Grinnell, like that, thesaurus and, language, the dictionary, my Northern Cheyenne dictionary, big leather thing like that. And half the words in it are wrong, but half of them are right. Like that. And so I always have to look them up like that. So I flip it open like that, and I start going through, how would I spell Evo et se heo mese? And I found it. They weren't together, but they were two separate words. And the literal translation was the wandering without. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. That's kind of a compelling thing there. And so I think it was like maybe about a month or two later, I ran into Charles again, like at a basketball game up in Lame Deer. And I went over and sat down next to him, like, and I said, hey, Charles, you don't mind me asking? Like, and I said, I'm wondering, have you ever thought about like where this legend of the Evo et se heo mese might have come from? And he goes, I have. Since we had that conversation on the porch, I've been thinking about that because I knew when I saw you next, you were going to ask me that question. And so I said, well, I got to ask it like that. And he goes, yeah, I did. I gave it some thought. And he says, that's an old term. Like that. He says, I remember my great-grandfather using it on me, when I was a kid. And he said, my great-great-grandfather, he's the one that fought, in the Little Bighorn. He said, so I know this is something that goes back. He said, if not hundreds, certainly maybe even thousands of years, this was a term that was used, by the human beings. And I said, well, what do you think where do you think the background for it is? Like that? And he said, I got a sneaking suspicion like that. He said, you got to remember that back in the day, he said, our people, we did not have prisons. We did not have police departments or anything like that. He said, if somebody did something bad, or if somebody was just bad enough that they could not be trusted to be among the human beings, what we did was we banished them. He says, and what you got to remember is, he says, hundreds, thousands of years ago, he says, if a lone human being was out by themselves in the wilderness, they didn't last for very long. He said, so basically it was a death sentence is what it was. And he said, and what I couldn't help think was that all of those banished souls, all of those souls that had been banished out into the wilderness, hungering for human companionship, didn't band all together to create the Evo et se heo mese, the wandering without. And that's where I think it came from. And I was like, oh, that's just a wee bit scary. Like that might just be something, And Walt, he's kind of practical. He's kind of a creature of empirical data. It's like, nothing but the facts, because he's an investigator. That's what he works with, is facts. Everything else is just stuff that gets in the way. But he's respectful, of the Northern Cheyenne ways, and respectful of the Crow beliefs and all of these things. And he's also one of those guys that tends to jump right in where angels fear to tread. And all the way through, like at Daughter of the Morning Star, he keeps hearing about this place up in Montana, Fort Pratt, Montana, all the way through like that, and he keeps asking people, he keeps saying, have you ever heard of this place, Fort Pratt, Montana? And their answer is always, yeah, Fort Pratt, yeah. And Walt's like, where is it? And they go, it's up near, it's over by, nobody can place exactly where it is. Everybody knows it exists. Everybody knows it's somewhere, but they just don't know exactly where. So, Walt decides to go and try to see if he can find Fort Pratt. And of course, the name Fort Pratt came from Richard Henry Pratt, who was the one that was the founder of all of the boarding schools here in the United States. And he's the one that's famous for the term, kill the Indian to save the man. He's also the one that coined the term racist. There was no term racist until Richard Henry Pratt came up with it. And I think his heart was in the right place, where he was trying to give the natives the same kind of education affordability like that as the mainstream of society. The problem was the boarding schools. It didn't really work. I mean, you can't take children that young and pluck them out away from their families, like that, and from their culture, and haul them halfway across the country and drop them down, shave their heads, like that, put uniforms on them, and forbid them to be able to speak their language or talk about their history or anything like that. And just lately, like that, there have been all of these newspaper articles about what's going on up in Canada with the provincial boarding schools, like that, and they've literally found mass graves in these boarding schools of like hundreds of children, if not thousands of children that died on the watch, like on these boarding schools. So just now, Deb Howland actually started doing a report, on the possibility, and there are mass graves here in the United States, like at these boarding schools too. And you wonder, did these parents ever know what happened to their children? Did they ever find out? Did anybody ever get back in touch and tell them what was going on or anything? So it's a little bit horrifying to think about. But all I could think of was, if there's like a feeding ground for the Evoitse Heomese, it would have to be one of those boarding schools, like young, tender souls, full of sorrow, because all haunting is regret. And that sent me on the way, like I had to send Walt up to Fort Pratt, Montana. So if you guys don't mind, I'll give you a little reading from the book. Okay? I gotta get my self set up here. Hold on. That won't work. This may take longer than I think. Because it's hard to hold the book and read at the same time. Here we go. Hold on. Let me get my safety glasses on. So, the quote that I use actually for this particular book is actually from T.S. Eliot, is where it came from. Again, so. It goes like this. Hell is oneself. Hell is alone. The other figures in it, merely projections. There is nothing to escape from and nothing to escape to. One is always alone. This is from chapter 1, Hell and Back. There was the sound of bells, and then the silence. The kind of quiet that only comes with snow, capturing the sound waves of life and smothering them out before they can cry. I couldn't open my eyes, and something was weighing them down, so I brought my hand up to my face and brushed the snow away. My eyes worked now, so I tried to sit up, feeling something strike my chest, something small and metallic. A couple of somethings. Snow, a lot of it, falling in static sheets, fat flakes covering everything, silencing everything as they cascaded down from the yellowish black sky. I was lying in the middle of the street. I started to stand, but discovered that part of my sheepskin coat was frozen to the ground. Leaning over to one side, I noticed that there were 2 silver dollars in my lap, so I pulled my glove off with my teeth. I picked one of the coins, and they were old ones, but looked remarkably unsullied. I glanced across again and couldn't see anybody else on the street, so I figured finders keepers. Scooping up the other one, I deposited them both into my pocket and then pulled the glove back on, tugging the tiny red beaded ends on the straps to snug it. I reached behind me and pulled my coat loose from the ice, and I'd at least been lying out there long enough for it to freeze to the ground. Raising myself up to a kneeling position, I felt something around my neck and pulled the material up to find a red scarf. It didn't particularly look like a man's scarf, silky with fringed end, but with current weather conditions, I figured that I didn't have a lot of options. Momentarily distracted, I saw a lump of snow beside me and reached over to find it was a pinch front cowboy hat. I slapped it against my knee to knock it clean. Figuring it was also mine, I lifted it and tugged it on over my head. It felt a little tight, but that was probably from being as frozen as it was. I stood the rest of the way and shook off the accumulated snow from my coat like a dog. I was at the top of a hill, which looked down a winding 2-lane road and then dropped off into a small town about a mile away. Turning, I could see the top of the hill was covered with tiny crosses encircled by a wrought iron fence, where a little further off, the corner of the stone building still stood, shedding rubble into the snow, a large lump of which was centered on some sort of platform. Above a gate, I saw an arch with the words, Fort Pratt Industrial Indian Boarding School. There was some movement at the apogee of the arch, and I watched as a great horned owl slowly swiveled his head from back to front to look at me, golden eyes shining like twin harvest moons. Howdy. He continued to observe me with all the patience in the world. Well, at least he didn't say who. Sighing, I turned back towards the town, thinking I might get a little more conversation in that direction. Starting off down the 2-lane, I lumbered through the snow for a while, eventually pausing in front of a few buildings on the outskirts, a house or two, a library, and what looked to be an old Catholic church. There were buildings on either side of the road, the type of single-story storefronts seen in many small towns scattered across the Rocky Mountain West. Plastic wreaths hung from the dozen or so lampposts with red electric candles in each that flickered yellow and then one at a time slowly dimmed. I couldn't really tell if it was night or day, with the skies colored a strange yellowish cast, and with the inclement weather, the surrounding distance was darkened into an ocean of obscurity. There were a few lit buildings, a 2-story grand vintage structure to my left, a Baker Hotel, and a movie theater down on the corner, with a yellow and green neon marquee that read, "Support your local sheriff." I had a mild headache and could smell something burning, as if there was a forest fire not too far away, and I felt strangely detached for a guy who'd been left lying out there in the street. With a deep sigh, I took a few more steps, trudging towards the side of the road, amazed that I hadn't been scraped up by a snowplow. My back hurt, and my limbs and head felt heavy, and I must have been out there for quite some time. There were no cars or trucks parked on the street as far as I could see. I stepped into the curb and then the sidewalk. There was a cafe on the other end of the block, and I decided to walk in that direction, and even though it appeared to be leading out west and out of town, booths lined the glass front of the place, and the condensation on the inside of the windows promised warmth. A woman with strawberry blonde hair was wiping the counter, but no patrons, and I was worried that the tiny restaurant might be closed. I was relieved when I pushed on the wooden bar and the glass door swung open, a bell jingling just above my head. Appearing to be in her early 30s, the blonde was stunningly beautiful. Dressed in a waitress uniform, she looked up at me, and there was something about her that stuck the words in my throat. I swallowed. "I'm sorry, are you closed?" She looked up at a clock on the wall that advertised Red Lodge Soda Company. It was 8:17 p.m. Not for another 43 minutes, but I was thinking of closing with the blizzard and all. She looked back at me. "But can I help you?" I slipped off my hat and stared through the fogged windows and back into the street. "Is it a blizzard?" She laughed, a silvery, melodic sound that made me turn back to her and smile. "Storm of the century. What, you don't read the papers?" "Not particularly." I walked over and sat on a stool in front of her and placed my hat on the seat next to me. "You know what? I could really use a cup of coffee." "You got it." She smiled, her hazel eyes sparkling. "The co-op says that they aren't going to get the power back on for 31 hours. I watched as she plucked a buffalo china mug from under the counter, walked to the coffee maker, and then pulled the pot out by its plastic handle. I glanced around the well-lit space. "How is it that you still have electricity?" "Municipal generator system on the hill outside of town at the old boarding school. I guess back in the day the power went out all the time." She rested the mug on the counter. "Are you new around here?" "Yeah." I looked back at the streets. "At least I think so." She laughed at the absurdity of my response. "You're not sure?" I pulled the red scarf from my neck, stuffing it into my hat, and unbuttoning my heavy coat. "Well, to be honest, I just woke up out there on the road a moment ago." She stared at me. "Are you drunk?" "I don't think so. Drunk feels better than this." I pulled off my glove, tucked them into my pocket, and sipped my coffee as she studied me. "You look familiar." I nodded and smiled. "You know, it's funny, but when I came in here, that's the same thing I was thinking about you." The coffee tasted hot, rich, and life-reaffirming. "What's your name?" "Martha." I sat there, looking at her and thinking that of all the names in the world that I could have chosen for her, that one was perfect. "Just Martha?" She nodded, stepping back guardedly. "Just Martha, for now." "It's a great name." I started to stick out my hand to shake hers, but then stopped. She glanced at my hand as I lowered it, but then went back to studying my face. Something wrong? I don't want to panic you or anything, but I can't seem to remember my name. Her eyes sharpened and she folded her arms. Your name is Walt Longmire. So we know each other? No. Then how do you know my name? It's on the liner of your hat. I reached over and picked the thing up, removing the scarf and reading the barely legible gold lettering in the sweatband. This hat belongs to Walt Longmire, a gift from the grateful people of Absaroka County, Wyoming. I looked up at her. Is this Absaroka County? She moved closer, staring at me, pressing the palms of her hands against the edge of the counter. Not even Wyoming. Welcome to Fort Pratt, Montana, Walt Longmire. That's all you get tonight. I'm not going to read you the whole book. I think you can do that at home. There are a couple of different things, like I guess, to take into consideration right off the bat. First off, like that, when Walt wakes up, he's got coins over his eyes. And for anybody that knows mythology like that, you know, like that to get across the river Styx into Hades, like that, you have to pay the ferryman the $2. And the other thing was in the Old West, like that, when they did not have the ways to fight rigor mortis that they do now, like that, the way that they would keep your eyelids from popping open after you were dead was to put a coin over top of your eyes. What's the first thing that Walt meets in this town of Fort Pratt? It's an owl. And as we all know from reading the books, the Mistas are the messengers from the camp of the dead. They go back and forth. Walt's wearing a sheepskin coat that we haven't seen him in since they cut it off of him in the cold dish. And it's as the night goes on, it's always 8:17 p.m. And any number reference seems to always be 31. Could it have anything to do with the fact that 31 young boys died in a terrible fire in the Fort Pratt boarding school at approximately 8:17 p.m.? So as this night goes on, Walt keeps meeting people. And he doesn't know them, but he does know them. And he also knows something about them maybe that they don't know about themselves, that they're dead. What does that mean for Walt? That's all you get tonight. I'll let you take it from here. I hope you enjoy it. It's been described in two different ways. One reviewer described it as the greatest hits album because all of these characters keep popping up that we think thought we were never going to see again. And then the other one is it's kind of a love letter. It's kind of a little bit of a love letter after 17, 18 books from me to you guys, like that, so that you can kind of go through there. And not every time do we get to be smarter than Walt, but boy, in this one we get to be smarter than Walt almost all the way through. So I hope you enjoy it. At this point in time, what I normally do is open it up and let you guys ask some questions. Does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask? You can ask me about anything you'd like. I don't want to give away too many plot points about this particular book, like that, but anything else I'm game for. Yes, sir.
In the book, where did the priest come from?
Oh. Okay, I don't think it'll give away anything for me to tell you that. Do you remember the priest, the Air Force priest that Walt talked to up at the cafe on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Daughter of the Morning Star? Do you remember him? He's the one that was teasing Walt because Walt said something about Air Force, and he looks at Walt and says, "Yeah, it's kind of like the Marines, but for smart people." You remember him? He tells a story about a fellow that he went to seminary school back in Pennsylvania, a fellow by the name of Vanderhoven, Paul Vanderhoven, like that, who suddenly developed an interest in this Evoetse Heomese and Fort Pratt, Montana, by discovering a book, an old leather book up on the top shelves in the Baldwin Book Barn, which is an old 5-story used bookstore in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. And he pulled that book out, found out about it, went west, and disappeared, and nobody ever heard from him again.
Was he dead?
I don't know. You're going to have to make a choice on that, aren't you? You're going to have to make a decision. Well, that's a pretty good clue right there, isn't it? So, anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have fun introducing levity in your stories?
Oh yeah, I have a problem not doing it. I got a real problem like that whenever I write serious scenes, because I can always think of 15 lines that will just blow the seriousness apart, which is actually pretty good like that, because I get a lot of law enforcement people that read the books, and the first thing they always say is, it's the humor. I love the humor in the books. Like, I mean, there are a couple of favorite lines in this book, like, but one of my favorites, this is interesting too, like, because, you know, when Walt is, you know, disappears, you know, going looking for this town up in Montana, you know, who's going to come looking for Walt? You know, it's going to be the Mod Squad. It's going to be Henry, Vic, and the dog. Okay, and woe be unto whoever it is that gets in the way of them finding Walt, right? Well, you know, of course, you know, this is the first time I've ever written scenes in a book that weren't first person, from Walt's perspective. I mean, all 17 books have been, you're in Walt's head the whole time. Suddenly in this book, there are all of these sequences that are third person, and we get to see Henry and Vic and the dog like off on their own, away from Walt, which is really kind of interesting. Like, it was very interesting for me to write that for the first time after 17 years. And one of the humorous parts is, of course, like whenever Vic comes out of the hotel room, like she looks at Henry and says, "I got to go walk my gun," and Henry's like, "What?" Like, she goes, "I got to do that or else it makes mistakes." So, you know, so for me, like, it's always like an opportunity to have humor be involved, even in the most dire of situations like that, which is certainly what Walt finds himself in this particular book. But that's one of the secret weapons that I gave him. You know, I mean, whenever you're doing pitches and stuff to Hollywood, the first thing they always ask, "Yeah, but what's their superpower?" You know, and mine is like, he's got a sense of humor. Like, you know, that'll get him up the hill when nothing else will, you know, it seems like to me. So, but yeah, thank you for noticing.
Yeah,
like that,
no,
because
life
I
is
do.
like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Keep you going when nothing else will. So, anybody else? You guys are quiet tonight.
Are they gonna make a movie out of this, or a show?
Oh, who knows? You know, who knows? Look, I mean, we're on a holding pattern right now, you know, with the TV show, like which is kind of interesting, like because I don't know if you guys know it or not, but we're still one of the top 10 to 20 shows every week on Netflix. This is 6 years after ceasing production on Netflix, like and so I was talking to Robert Taylor, like, and he was saying that he had heard that Netflix's contract runs out in November. And, you know, I said, yeah, but I've heard that for 6 years now. Like, you know, every year, like, they're going to cancel Longmire and get rid of it. And I swear, I think what it is they've got a kind of like a, you know, a sweetheart deal, you know, with Warner Brothers as far as, you know, Longmire is concerned, because they produced those last 3 seasons, like, out of 6 seasons. And I think what it is like they, you know, whenever they canceled the show, they didn't cancel it, they just stopped the show because they couldn't buy it from Warner Brothers is what happened. And so when they stopped doing it, like, I'm sure what they thought was, you know what, we'll, you know, this little cowboy and Indian show, we'll run it for another year or so, and then we'll nix it and get rid of it. Well, then week after week, month after month, year after year, this is Netflix. These are the guys that like do these multi-million-dollar international casts with big, huge stars and all this kind of stuff like that. And there's our little Indian and cowboy show just creeping along every week in the top 10 to 20. And I don't think they know what to do. I think, you know, because they don't have control, you know, until they could convince Warner Brothers, you know, to do more episodes like that. You know, they're kind of on a holding pattern. So we'll see what happens. Keep your fingers crossed, and then we'll go from there. The special effects, I think, would kill them. Like, I had to try and do this one, to be honest. So who can say? Like, but you never know. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody knows that, you know, if it's in the internet, then it must be right.
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned that, I think it was like the 4th book, you know, had them in Vietnam.
Uh-huh.
Well, on Fandom, it says that Henry and Walt
Uh-huh.
were born like in 1962 and 63. So how were they in Vietnam when they were like 8 or 9 years old?
Yeah, that's not right.
That kind of.
It's on the internet, though, because it must be, right? Yeah. I hear some of the weirdest stuff. Okay, you know, I have people confront me, and they're like, well, if this is this and that's that, then that means this. And I'm like, where did you read that? On the internet? And I'm like, yeah, you should turn that off. Like, that really. Yeah, I mean, the basic math doesn't work. Okay, it really doesn't work.
Like fandom.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of crazy, and there's timelines that people have gone through with detail like that, you know, and all this stuff, and there are parts in there that I'm like, that's not in any of the books, that's not in anything, like, for goodness sake. And so it's a little off, you know, sometimes like that, but it's funny too, like that, because, you know, whenever they first cast the television show, one of the first things they did was they said, well, we're thinking about making Walt and Henry about 10 years younger than they are, you know, in the books. Like, and I immediately had the redneck cowboy response where I was like, well, now why are we doing that? And they said, well, because we'd really like the show to run for 10 years and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers, you know, by the time we get to the end. And so it's been kind of interesting to see, you know, them kind of jury rig it a little bit, you know, to young up the characters. And people have asked me, they've said, you know, well, why did you, you know, make the characters older? And I said, you know what, Walt has a world-weary kind of quality to him that I think is really one of the appealing aspects of him. He's been there, he's done that, he's had losses that no one should ever have to go through, tragedies in his life that no one should ever have to go through, like that. And so I had to admit, you know, I said the main reason was the world weariness, and the producers were like, well, I don't think we understand completely. I said, have you ever met a world-weary 30-year-old? Because all I ever want to say to him is, buckle up, Buttercup, there's more coming, you know? So it just seemed essential, you know, that they have an age to them like that. And then, you know, whenever I wrote, you know, things like, you know, Another Man's Moccasins, you know, where their experiences were in Vietnam, like that. There's actually one that's in the wings I'm waiting to do, like that. That's actually when they both graduate and lose their deferment. You know, they've both been in Southern California. Well, Henry would have been in Berkeley, but he would have come down like that and jumped in the old ranch truck that Walt inherited from his father to drive around while he was playing football at USC. But then they graduate, well, then they lose their deferment, and they get, you know, drafted. And so Henry's going to Louisiana, you know, for special operations group training there. They took one look at him and they're like, oh yeah, you're special op. And so they took him for there. So he's got to go across the country and go to Louisiana. Walt would have probably gone, you know, as a Marine, would have gone here in California, but there's a reason he gets sent all the way to Parris Island over in South Carolina. And so there's this trip that they have to take on Route 66 at the ripe old age of 22, 23 years old. And just imagine these two guys at 22, 23 years old traveling all the way across Route 66 and all the way across the United States. So that's one of the ones that's out there in the works. So somebody remind me to tell you about the next book when we finish up, okay? That's your job, okay? I always appoint somebody. It can't be me because I can't remember that far. My short-term memory always leaves me. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What was your thought process when you entered the whole ghost thing with Walt, is how he's seeing it, but yet when he produces the ring,
right,
and kind of connects that. How did you?
Right, you're referring to Hell's Empty, Hell's Empty, and then the cold dish, whenever Walt goes back up the mountain, twice in a blizzard at 11,000 feet, and he's concussed and he's hyper. He's got frostbite, hypothermia, all these things working against him. And, and he keeps seeing, the old Cheyenne out in these trees, and they're moving along with him, and they're singing and he hears Henry, singing as he's carrying him out of there with that, with that bullet wound and everything. And the moment for me that kind of encapsulates what I try to accomplish is when they both get loaded into the EMT van to take them down the mountain and get them patched up. And Walt rolls over and looks at Henry and says, do you think it was wise with internal injuries to be singing like that? And Henry turns and looks at him and says, what singing? That's the moment. I mean, I don't want to go full Stephen King, but what I want to address and what I also want to try and display is that moment where you're out where you shouldn't be and nobody knows where you are. And you start hearing little voices out there in the woods. We've all had those moments where you think you saw something out of the corner of your eye, but you're not sure you did. And so I think that there's a lot more in the world than we're aware of. And it's a major part, of who the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow are. And it's a part of their everyday life. There are all of these things that they have as explanations for who we are, what we are, and where we are. And one of the main aspects of that is to slow down. I mean, we're kind of stuck, in this, this modern society that's so technologically driven that everything has to be fast, everything has to be in nanoseconds and all this kind of stuff. And, for the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow, it's all about slowing down. It's all about, being in your life, and being aware, and being present, in your life with all the people around you and the people you care about. That's your life that you're just, pumping away, trying to be fast, like that. And to me, that's an essential part of that. And it kind of dovetails a little bit with Walt, because that's kind of what Walt does. As a detective, what's his job? To slow down and notice things that other people might not notice. And so that makes him susceptible, to that particular dovetailing. So thanks for the question. That's a really great question. Anybody? Yes?
You apparently have a lot of contact with the people on the reservations.
Uh-huh.
How are they doing overall?
Oh, I mean, they're suffering. A lot of the COVID stuff, like that, really hit a lot of them really hard, like that. And the reason was actually pretty simple, like that, because it's kind of like why the Italians had such a really big problem with it. Multi-generational families living in the same house, and it's the same thing on the res. Like that, you've got grandparents, parents, the children, grandchildren, all of them, like that, and in one household. And so what happened was the kids would go out and play, and they would come back, and they would bring it in, and then the elderly, like that, would suffer the recriminations of that. But as a general rule, like that, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is the one from Steinbeck. And I always love bringing up Steinbeck when I'm in California, because I was doing a conference with Western Writers of America one time, and they asked us, they said, well, who's your favorite Western writer? And I was like, John Steinbeck. And the guy was moderating and said, he's not a Western writer. And I'm like, the Red Pony of Mice and Men? I went through the whole list, of all of these, like, and I was like, yeah, he's a Western writer. I'm like, come on, California's as far west as you can go, all right? For goodness sake. Like, and so I remember in his introduction to America and Americans, he said, what was great, he says, all the natives I know have incredible senses of humor. They've had to. They've been putting up with us for like a couple of 100 years, like, and so they had to have that sense of humor, like that, for goodness sake. So, but overall, they're tough.
Yeah.
They're tough, like that, and they care about each other. They have
Is
connections. Now, what now?
it getting any better for them?
Oh, in different ways, yeah. Like in different ways, yeah. It's hard for me to make, an overall assessment like that, because I mean, obviously, not only is it different tribes like that, but it's different, sects, within the tribes like that, and then just different areas like that along the reservations like that. I mean, because some of those reservations up on the high plains like that, some of them are, as big as Maryland, and so you're talking about a very large, geographic area with a lot of people in it like that, and to try and like make a judgment on how they're doing, good or bad, like it's a little bit tough for me to be able to do. So, but yeah, as far as I know, yeah, they're doing just fine. Thanks very much. So, anybody else?
I have one more.
Yeah.
Was it fun choosing the characters that you were going to bring back to populate the town?
It was. I had a blast doing that. Like, I mean, whenever Walt wakes up out in the middle of the street with a couple of silver dollars, Bobby Womack is from the Highwayman is going to have to show up, for goodness sake. Like, and then, of course, one of my absolute favorite characters, Virgil White Buffalo, who is based off of a good friend of mine, Danny Pretty on top. And so the more you guys find out about, me using real people as characters in my books, the less impressed you're going to be with my writing ability. You're going to come up someday to northern Wyoming, you're going to look around, and you're going to go, he really isn't that good of a writer, he just lives in an interesting place. And but yeah, and I have a blast doing that. Like I was really, and some of these characters were ones that you were never going to see again, ever.
Right.
And so, to have that opportunity to bring them back in, and then not tell you exactly who they are, and let you, figure out, because I've had so many people, and then I've had a few that like were just like, when you were asking about the priest, a couple of people have written and said, okay, I know everybody but this one. What's this one? Like, and who are they? Like, and then I have to write it back and tell them, oh, that's from this book. Like, and so.
Well, you know that Kindle has the X-ray feature for
Uh-huh.
books. Did
What's
you know
that? What is that?
If you're reading on a Kindle and you go up to the top 3 ellipses at the top and
Uh-huh.
hit that, there's an X-ray function.
Uh-huh.
And you can learn about people, places, you can search. So it's really
Oh,
helpful
my.
if you're sleuthing.
Oh, wow.
But there's still 2 I can't find.
That's not fair. Get away from that. I didn't know such things existed. Like,
Yeah,
for goodness sake.
there.
I mean, there's a reason why I don't carry a cell phone, I'm not the most technologically advanced cowboy on the face of the earth.
Well,
Like
you
that.
read
So,
on
yes,
top.
sir.
I think when you were here last time, you'd mentioned like in that first book that you'd had, I don't know if it was like the sheriff, a local sheriff or policeman or something,
Uh-huh.
that kind of critiqued part of your.
Oh, yeah, Larry Kirkpatrick.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have contact?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, I've got all kinds of like guys that like are kind of like, and women too, like that they're responsible for certain technical aspects in my books, like, and rather than hound them, you know, with, okay, if this were to happen, this would happen, what would happen with this? What I do is go ahead and write the book to the best of my abilities and then give it to them. And then if they'll tell me, okay, no, that would not happen, you can't do this, you have to have this happen, this is gonna happen. You know, it's a lot easier for them, I think, to do that. I've got medical experts, law enforcement experts, ballistics experts, you know, all those people that, you know, that read the books like that just for those specific purposes. Like, and not a one of them charges me. They all do it for free, like just to get their hands on the books early. Like it's. Yes, ma'am.
Have you always written, or is it something you started later on in life?
No, I always have written. Like, the difficulty being that wanting to be a writer is kind of like wanting to be an astronaut. You know, the odds against you are so great. Don't tell anybody. Don't embarrass yourself. Like, you know, just keep it to yourself, and then, you know, if it happens, you're like, wow, overnight, look at that, it happened like that. But yeah, I came from a family of storytellers, and I was the worst one. And so I thought, maybe if I write them down, you know, maybe I'll be able to, you know, to do this, you know, a little bit better like that. And so I did, like that, and that's how I started writing. So, somebody else had their hand up. Look at it. Yes, ma'am.
I was asked about your writing process, so the third person thing, that freaked me out more than the ghost.
Yeah, oh yeah, me too.
Did this book kind of force that, or did you want to?
It kind of did, because I mean, how could I have Walt, you know, seeing them and knowing that they're there? You know, there was no way to do that. There was no way to do that. Like, so I literally had to go to that third person, which I actually enjoyed doing. I had a really good time doing, because it gave me an opportunity to say things, you know, that I normally would not get the chance to describe. Somebody wrote and said this was one of their favorite quotes in the book, and I don't think it's going to give anything away, but there's a point where Henry's in some deep trouble, and he's out there in the darkness, like that, you know, and these three guys are, you know, coming towards him, and one of the bad guys says, you know, well, I'll go this way, he'll go that way, and you go up the middle. And the guy in the middle says, yeah, but I don't have a weapon. And then the next sentence is, and in the darkness, the only sound was the Cheyenne Nation smiling. That's scary.
Yeah, you couldn't have done that.
No, I couldn't do that with Walt, you know, telling the stories like that. So give me some opportunities like that to do a little bit of that. And I'm probably going to do a little bit more of that later on, you know, work with some other stuff as far as that's
Thanks for the
concerned.
warning, because it really surprised me.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Think how long I sat staring at that second chapter thinking, okay, they're here. Now what? So, somebody else said yes.
Do you have like bios of all the different characters?
You know, I don't. I don't.
Does that happen in your head?
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I don't think I'm that much of a genius. It's just that I spend like, you know, 8 hours a day with these characters, and so I should probably have, you know, their backstories and everything down, you know, pretty well. A lot of them also are based off of people I know, you know, and so I use a lot of their histories like that to draw from, you know, to develop the characters too, like that. But no, I just, you know, generally I can come up with it like that, or, you know, go back and find it is what I do. My other secret weapon is George Waddell, who does the audio versions of my books. And what I do is I have all the books on CD. And what I do is if I've got a trip, you know, and I know that I've got a book that's going to harken back to one of the earlier books, I'll put that book in and I'll just listen to that book as I'm driving along for 8 hours, because that's what we do in Wyoming, is drive for 8 hours. And then, you know, it'll refresh my memory on a lot of stuff like that I need. So somebody else had their hand up. Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
By the way, yeah, George Waddell, awesome.
Isn't he great?
He is fantastic.
He's a wonderful reader. Boy, is he good.
Yeah. My other question to you is, have you ever just gotten into the flow and you surprised yourself? I mean, like shocked yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, I didn't know that was gonna happen to my.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like, and you hear a lot of authors, they'll say, I just, you know, the characters take off and do what they want. That worries me. I don't know about you guys, but people who sit in a room by themselves and hear voices like that, that's, you know, a little off. Like that. But I think there's a scientific reason for that. What it is it's your subconscious mind. That's all it is. Your conscious mind makes the outline, your conscious mind does the research, your conscious mind has got its fingers, you know, on the keyboard, and there's your poor subconscious mind along for the ride. You know, it doesn't have any opportunities to have any effect on any of that, but it knows the whole story, maybe even better than your conscious mind does. And so like any other backseat driver, it throws something over the seat every once in a while. And then you got to deal with that. And it's really, you know, I mean, those improvisational moments, like what you discover is, I think, as you get more experience and get to be a better writer, you find yourself more open to those ideas because you're like, that might be an opportunity that I'm passing up. And, you don't want to ever miss one of those, like, along the way. Yes, ma'am?
As you're writing, do you believe through your writing that sometimes you're working out something going on in here separate from the book?
Oh, I'm
as you're
sure.
writing?
Oh, I'm sure that's the case, yeah. I mean, there's gotta be a reason for me to write that book, and so generally it's gonna be something personal. It's gonna be something that, I feel strongly about.
Like the lady on the missing person?
Absolutely. Like, and that haunted me, for 3 or 4 years, as I got ready to write that
Yeah.
book. And a lot of that stuff was just playing over in my head and thinking about how to write that. What's it gonna be? How's it gonna happen? All those things. But I mean, if it doesn't interest me, if it doesn't hold my attention for the better part of a year where I'm writing that book, it's not gonna interest you. It's not gonna hold your attention either. So it's important for me to make sure, that I make good choices as far as the books are concerned. And I've got another 12 in my head
Yay.
right now, just waiting to, see who's gonna win the horse race and get to be the next book, so.
We'll be on your way.
I know. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of on the same line, do you ever have any dreams with your characters?
Oh, all the time.
Or situations? that
Oh, absolutely.
inspire you?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes they're weird dreams, where the characters are they're not in a book, they're, just in my life or something like that, so, I don't know, I mean, and I entertain that, I'm okay with that. Whatever the material comes from, that's fine by me, I don't have any problem with it, so. Anybody else? Yes?
I noticed Tony Hillerman commented on your books and liked your books. Did you ever meet him? What was
Oh,
he-
yeah,
what was
yeah.
he- what was
I actually got to know Tony pretty well. He was a really great guy. And I won the Tony Hillerman Cowboys and Indians Magazine Mystery Short Story Contest. I mean, the title is longer than the short story. And he just was a great guy. Just a good Oklahoma cowboy. We just hit it off. Became good friends. I learned more in one dinner with him than I did in a master's program in writing. And he was just fantastic. He's the one that gave me George Guidell, as a matter of fact. He's the one that gave me George. He said, get George Guidell if you can, and so I did. Yeah.
Does the real Henry standing there not use contractions?
He doesn't, but only in certain situations, because I asked him about it one time, and what I noticed was whenever he would do a public speaking gig or something like this, he would do this, he would drop into this B-movie Indian speak, and I finally asked him about it, I got annoyed by it, and I was like, what are you doing, what is that all about, and I said, why do you do that? He goes, just to annoy white people. And I was like, okay. Anybody else?
Last question for you.
Okay.
You want me to ask you about your next book?
Yes, I'll let her ask this one question and then I'll do that. Yes.
Well, I understand you are already on the New York Times bestseller list.
I am. I failed to mention that, didn't I? Yeah. We actually are number 8 on the New York Times bestsellers list this week. So that's pretty exciting. And it's trying to get me out of here, but I'm going to tell you about the next book. I'm going to do that. The next book actually, what happens is Walt is in a search and rescue situation. He's invited by search and rescue to come help and look for this woman's car, and look for this woman that's gotten lost up in the Bighorn Mountains. And so Walt's looking, where search and rescue is looking in the section that they're in, and he's like, no, if her car is there, she would have come across the bridge and followed the creek bed back down. Nobody gets lost and goes up. You always go down. So she would have taken that route. And so he goes up and finds her. And he finds her, and they're out in the middle of nowhere, of course, and his radio won't work. It doesn't have any reception. And so he has to borrow her cell phone and go on a rock outcropping, and they get up there in this rock outcropping, and he calls them in, says, we're here, she's fine, I've given her some food, in a blanket, and we'll be coming out on this particular trailhead, on this route and all that. Excuse me, so they do it. And as he's standing there making the phone call, he's looking around. He's looking around and he remembers this place. And what it is, it's his grandfather's elk camp, is what it is. And he remembers a conversation that he had with his father when he was young. And his father said, have I ever told you about the first time I saw a man die? And Walt's like, no, sir. And so he starts telling him the story. And what happens is there's this fellow by the name of Bill Sutherland, who is the state accountant for the state of Wyoming. And he comes back from World War II, like at the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes, and he just wants to clear his head, and go hunting like that and get an elk like that for the winter. And so he calls up, Walt's grandfather and father, like it says, would you mind if I came up and, hunted on your elk camp like that? And they said, absolutely, come on up. Like that, they go up there. He's accidentally killed. They're not sure if it's accidentally, but he's killed. Problem being that nobody in the elk camp was using the particular caliber of weapon that kills Bill Sutherland. So they can't figure out, what happened or anything. And so that's the end of that. And of course, Walt, is sitting there on these rocks, and all of a sudden he looks down and the dog is digging in the rocks like that, and he leans forward and says, get away from there before a badger comes out and bites your nose off. And the dog raises its head up and it's got a leather strap hanging out of his mouth. Could be a piece of horse tack, could be a rifle sling. Walt climbs down off the rocks, reaches down into the rocks, pulls out a Weatherby 300 H&H Magnum, the exact caliber weapon that was a prototype at that period of time that killed Bill Sutherland. There's no serial numbers on it. It's a prototype weapon from Weatherby, and so there's no way to be able to track it. But of course, Walt's pretty good. Walt's pretty good, at tracking things down. And I like to think that Walt is like one of the most ecumenical detectives on the face of the earth. He is a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty, except in this case, where we discover the rifle belonged to Lloyd Longmire, his grandfather.
Oh, wow.
And in this case, Walt's out for blood, family blood. And that's all you get until next year. You want the mic?
No, I don't. I just want to thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my
Everybody else
pleasure.
feels the same way, right?